James, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I know it took a while, but we're here. And I'm really excited to not only hear your story firsthand, but also share that with the listeners. I'm really excited to hear more about it and how you've been able to shift your perspective and change some of the things that you were experiencing early in life. But before we jump into it, I do want to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself, what's brought you here, and what are you doing right now?
Okay, I'll begin by first sharing a little bit about my background. I was just a country lawyer who robbed a bank and received a 15-year sentence, which I served 5 years in the Federal Correction Institution in Ashland, Kentucky. My last year, I was transferred to Petersburg to the camp. Everyone, including myself, concluded that I had become a compulsive gambler. In my first book, of course, Deal by Me, A Golden Opportunity to Blow. However, as some time would pass, I began to reflect on my past and I did a self evaluation on my life that I shared in my second edition of Deal by Me that I entitled Self Evaluation. I eventually came to the conclusion that I was not a compulsive gambler, but
Mm-hmm.
rather I was afraid to fail.
Mm-hmm.
I had become this well known, successful lawyer who found himself losing everything he had accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
Started practicing law in 1971. Was the first African American lawyer to practice in my hometown. At the time, I was the youngest African American lawyer practicing in the state of North Carolina, 6 years of age. We only had about 100 African lawyers at that time in the whole state. Uh, we have that many right here in Durham, where I am now. So
Yeah.
that's where I come from. At When I got out in '86, I went back to school. Uh, I received my Master of Divinity. I eventually received my Doctor of Ministry. I was called a pastor, a missionary Baptist church, traditional missionary Baptist church. Approximately on the road was about 200 some members. On average service on a Sunday, about 100 members. And I was called there in 1990.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, continued to pastor for 32 years, the same church. Just retired back in uh, the end of 2022. Stayed out for about 6 months, getting called to different churches to preach for different occasions. But at about 6 months, it's been a good 6 months because it's been a year now. My pastor of my home church in Lewisburg, North Carolina, which is about 50 to 60 miles from Durham, died abruptly. Preached on that Sunday, and he passed on that Monday. We think from a heart attack or something that we don't really know what it was. But following week after his burial, the deacons called me to fill the pulpit for them until they got a pastor. So I've been serving my home church now for a year. As a matter of fact, it will be a year, the fourth Sunday in this month.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm doing now. And of course, involved in a lot of other activities and ministries, NAACP, Just got a call for someone to me to serve on an advisory council, prison ministry. So my life has just been going in those directions, but that's where I am at this point. I'm married, two adult kids, and two grandkids. That's more you want to ask, more you want.
No, I appreciate that. It's quite the journey you've been on, and I do want to explore different parts of your story because I feel like there's a lot of wisdom there, and I'm sure the listeners would appreciate to see how you went through different stages of your life, starting with early childhood, right? So you said you were the youngest African American lawyer in your state. So as you can appreciate, growing up in the 50s and 60s, still a lot of challenges for African American people at that time, as you can appreciate. Just trying to understand, what was it like for you to grow up in that era, and with the idea of being the youngest African American lawyer at the time, what was the pressure that you felt? Just trying to understand that, and if that also gave you that sense or that fear of failure, having all that pressure on you.
I think what happened when I got into gambling, I started gambling, and that was because I'd begun to work with another law office that was just prior to my passing bar. And of course, they were always go out on Wednesday playing poker. And so I learned that game. I to love it. When I was practicing, what happened, that I was to the point of lost a lot of money. I lost properties that I had accumulated. And this was about after my, during my, about my ninth or 10th year in my practice. Things were going well,
Mm-hmm.
but the gambling was something I'd just fallen in love with. And of course, because of the, the feeling of everybody was looking up to me, I was this well known lawyer in the area, the community. Everybody knew me. I wasn't a really large city, but I was the only lawyer in Lewisburg. We
Mm-hmm.
brought in a partner and we moved our office to Henderson, which was another area, but it was only one other lawyer there. And so when I felt myself going down, it was a matter of just doing something stupid to try to salvage what I thought I had. I thought I could get by with it. I thought I could do what I did, come out and start all over again. I'd be
Mm-hmm.
pay off my bills, pay off, uh, get my properties back, and all that kind of stuff. Crazy thinking now, so don't you know? It's not something that I'm proud of, but I'm just
Mm-hmm.
trying to tell you what my feelings were at the time. And I just did something that was really just outright stupid.
Mm-hmm.
I'll always remember it. I don't dwell on it now because I've been blessed. So I can't
Mm-hmm.
say a word. My life has changed, and I'm really just so thankful for
Mm-hmm.
where I am. But that's what happened. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason I talked to you about, I thought I was a compulsive gambler at first, and I did. But what happened is once I got out, I wanted to start doing some ministry
Mm-hmm.
and working with people who were going through some stuff. I was certified as a prison fellowship uh, person to do seminars in the prisons. Uh, and I called one of the nonprofits in a town with Chapel Hill. who was had a house where they had dealt with Gambling Anonymous. It was a not Gambling Anonymous place, and when I called over there, I told him, I said, I like to come over and talk with
Mm-hmm.
the residents. I said, I've gone through this. I like to give them some encouragement, what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked me if I was still a compulsive gambler. I told him I thought I was a compulsive gambler. And I said, no, I'm not. Because that had been, that had been maybe 10, 15 years. I had not gambled. I knew that was over. I was
Mm-hmm.
no problem whatsoever. All those habits I had, that was just, I was finished with them. And he said, you're not a compulsive gambler? He said, well, we believe once a compulsive gambler, always a compulsive gambler. Same concept with the alcoholics. Once an
Yeah.
alcoholic, always an alcoholic. No, I know I'm not no longer a gambler. And so he told me, I don't believe the guys would be interested in what I have to say. That made me start thinking about it. And that's how I came to the conclusion that I was not a compulsive gambler, but I was probably to the point where I just was afraid to fail. That's what got me to that point.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I do want to come back to the gambling piece and perhaps understand a bit deeper around what the hole was that you'd put yourself in. But I also want to understand a little bit about your childhood, right? What do you feel like, and just to go back to that question around growing up in the 50s and 60s, what was that like for you? And do you feel like that also impacted some of your decision making later on?
Yes, because I came from a family. We were not poor, but we were better off than most families in our
Yeah.
area. We were not rich.
Yeah.
Uh, my my grandfather owned lots of land. He owned probably about 500 acres of land. Large family. My mother was of 10 children. Everybody in the community going from one landlord to another landlord. Uh, and I grew up in that environment. And so that environment, I think, put the pressure on me that you gotta make it. You
Hmm.
you can't let us down. If it that's just that was the kind of feeling
Yeah.
that I had. Mom left to go to New York at when I was young because she wanted to make more money to help me through school, and of course I went through college,
Yeah.
law school. Uh, didn't have to borrow a dime. It was my mom took care of everything,
Hmm.
and so it was always that feeling that I can't let anybody down. I want
Yeah.
to be this perfect person.
Mm.
So I think that I'm able to talk about it now. So I think that was part of what I was going through, which was oh, I don't know exactly what was the straw. I'm not sure of that, except that I just knew I had bought property from my step grandmother after my grandfather died. He had left. We we had a partition proceeding, so everybody got. So I got her share. I bought it from her, and that was about 40 some acres. And now all of this, I got tied up because I was gambling or borrowing money on it or what have you. And
Hmm.
so I think it was a combination of just a whole lot of stuff
Yeah.
that I can't just really say one thing that it was this that broke the
Hmm.
camel's back, but it was a combination of a lot of things that I think I was just dealing with and going with. And knowing my mom had done all of this for me, so I didn't want to. I'm an only child. Uh, uh, I never knew who my father was. I'm an only child to a single mom, and so all of this was I can't let anybody down. And I
Yeah,
thought that doing this, I can recoup, get away with it. Crazy thinking now, but this is the thought I think I was going through at the time.
absolutely. Yeah, and I can relate to a certain extent because, and I've shared this before, my parents were immigrants to Canada, and I had similar pressure on myself, being the eldest child, that we made all these sacrifices so the children can have a better future. Don't let us down. And I constantly, that was like a reminder in the back of my head around pushing myself and succeeding through school just because I didn't want to let anyone down. And that pressure can be hard for people
Mhm.
because then when you get older, you're just always worried about that failure, as you've touched on. And it can be, like I said, we often then seek out other outlets for the ability to escape some of those emotions. And as you've shared, maybe gambling was one of those things that allowed you to escape from some of those difficult emotions that you probably had buried deep somewhere. Now, do you feel like when you were in school to become a lawyer, there was obviously that pressure you were carrying? What was that like for you? To how did you manage to navigate the school journey in order to become a lawyer?
Well, I did that okay because I never felt the pressure of finance.
Hmm.
My bills were always paid. Uh, in undergraduate school, I went to law school on a combined program. So where I went, you could go to law school at the end of your junior year, and so I entered law school my senior year, and I was also graduating that year. So I had 1 year of law school at the same time that I graduated as a senior. And so that was a good lots of friends. I I was able to get a part-time job at one of the business college because my undergraduate degree was in business. I taught secretary of accounting and business law, what have you. And I did some of that while I was in law school. So I had lots of friends and enjoyed everything. None of, none of the things that occurred to me seemed to have been bothering me while I was in school. It
Hmm.
was, I think it was more after I got out and started my practice and at my hometown. I tell my wife and I talk about it now. I tell people all the time that I if I had to do it over again, I would not probably have gone back to my hometown in the beginning. I would
Mm.
have gone with another law firm someplace else, and at at some, then perhaps after years have passed, and I wanted to go back, I think I would have been more mature, had a little bit more maturity behind me, and was able to deal with a lot of things that I was probably
Hmm.
dealing with subconsciously.
Yeah,
I think that was it more than anything else.
yeah, for sure. And coming back to the gambling piece, because I know you mentioned trying to pay the bills, finances were a bit tight. There was that fear of failure. So how did that then lead you to the bank incident? And what was going on through your head in order to make it all fit together? And I know you said it's not something you're proud of, but in hindsight, we can always look back and see all the ways we made certain decisions and how we could have made different decisions. But at that time, you were making the decision based on what you thought was the best, right? Obviously, with the information you had. But what led you to arrive to that decision?
Well, I had gotten to the point where I had basically lost everything.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I become depressed. I remember very distinctly, I got up that morning. My mom was now living with me. She had come down to stay from New York. And I got up early that morning and just, I don't know, I was just feeling so down and out. I went,
Yeah.
I pulled the pistol that I had in my drawer out and just went by my mom without her seeing me. And I knew she knew, thought something was wrong because I normally eat breakfast every morning. She would fix breakfast. And I went to the office. I sat there in the office and literally I was going to take my life. That was the way I was
Mm.
feeling. But I think the reason I didn't do it is because of my mom. Now, as I think back over it, it was like, oh, what am I going to do? My mom going to be left here by herself. She's, I'm, she was, as a matter of fact, she was helping me out in the office at the time.
Mhm.
And I abandoned the idea. I locked, I left the office, dismissed. I think the secretary had come in by that time, and I just told everybody to go home. And I had another gentleman who was working with me. I told him to go home, and I just locked the door and started riding. And I rode on 85. Had those same thoughts again, thoughts of crazy thoughts of just stopping in front of a big transfer truck. And the reason for that was because I had practiced law, so I know if a big transfer truck hit me in the back, that means good money. Okay, so I'm just all of it is going through my head, but for the same reason, I didn't have the nerve to do that. On riding into a little town called Oxford, which is probably about 10 miles from um, where I was practicing law. And I was getting a little hungry, and I went into the restaurant. Saw a couple of lawyers that I knew from the town because I had run for district court judge. Everybody knew me. I was at the NAF. It was NAF district composed of 5 counties, and like when I told you about well known, that was really a fact. I was known. As a matter of fact, the law had been like it is right now. I would have been the first elected uh, black district attorney in our county because I
Mhm.
got 47% of the vote in the primary. Okay,
Mhm.
but at that time you had to get 50%. So I when in the runoff I lost. But when I went into the restaurant, a couple of lawyers that I knew saw me who was talking. They left, and I just sit there eating, and everything was going through my mind, going crazy stuff, and I just happened to look up. And across where I was sitting eating, I saw the Central Carolina Bank. That was the name of it at the time.
Yeah.
And then the crazy thoughts just started running through my mind. Yes, I see the bank, then I'm thinking about, boy, if I could just get my hands on 50, $100,000, I could just pay off all my debts, and I could go back and practice law like nothing happened. Now, I'm admitting now that's crazy. Okay, I'm the first person to admit now that's
Yeah.
just as stupid and crazy as it could be. But that's where I was
Right.
at the time,
Yeah.
and so I left. I got in the car, and it took nerve. I rode around a couple of times, and then I just said, as I wrote in my book, my first book, I just said, "The heck, it caught a knot," and pulled right up to the door, went in, and said, "Stick up, give me your money." And that's what they did. I came out and put it in the back seat of my car, took off. Now, the stories from there on will make you laugh. Now, Rick, it is really funny when I think back over it now. But I had gotten about maybe half a mile from the bank, and I got stopped by a police officer. Yeah, I knew very well. He came up to the window and he said, "Lawyer." I had slumped over then because what happened, the they had put a what I don't know what you call it that goes off in the back in the bag of the
Yeah.
money,
The
and
security
so
alarm.
yeah,
Yeah.
yes. So whatever that was, it went off, and so my car started shaking. So that's when I pulled over, and I just got out, looked back, and I realized that I had all the red dye on the backseat of the car. So
Mm.
I threw it out in the field, threw the bag out in the field, came back and sat in the car, and I was really happy. I was slumped over because I was just out of it. It was just
Yeah.
like, what has happened to me? And so when the police officer came up, he recognized me, and I recognized him. And he said, "Lawyer." I said, "Yes." He said, "Are you okay?" I said, "Yeah, I'm all right. I'll be okay." And he said, "You sure?" I said, "Yeah, I'm, I'm okay, sure." And so he said, "Okay, you can go it on." So I started my car and pulled off. Okay. I I drove, I know, for probably another, well, a half a mile. And then I got stopped by a state trooper. And I got out of the car when he stopped a distance behind me. I got out of the car and I walked back to the back of the car and just stood up. And state trooper stayed in the car, I guess, for about 5 minutes. I wasn't sure what it was, but later on, now I figured out what he was doing. He was checking my tags because I had gotten insurance in my uncle's name because that's how bad I was doing financially. Okay, I could, and so I know that now that he was taking the tags because he was trying to figure out if it was a stolen car. Okay, and so after he got out and started walking toward me, the previous police officer came by, hollered at one and said, "I just stopped him. He's okay." And the, the state trooper told me, "Okay, you can go there." I got back in the car and took off again. I told you this was a funny story,
Yeah.
but I didn't realize that look, they know it's me. I messed up, so I headed straight to my former partner's office. By the time we had gone our separate ways, my gambling had gotten the best of me, and so we just went our separate ways. But I went to his office. He was not there, and so I called another friend of ours who practiced law down in another town, and he immediately came up. By the time he got there, Dr. Friend came and examined me. And when he got there, probably about 5 minutes talking to me, a swarm of officers pulled into the yard. And of course, they asked him if I was there, and he told them yes. And of course, he told me I was ready to turn myself in. So they allowed me to ride in the car with my lawyer friend back to Oxford. And of
Mm.
course, that's where I was booked, arrested, and put under $100,000 bond. So that's how that came about.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate you sharing that. And how old were you when that all that happened?
I was at the time I was about 36, I think.
Okay.
30, yeah, because I
So
had
you,
practiced law for about 10 years. Yeah, 36,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So now you're in this situation, you've been caught, you go to prison, the sentence is 15 years, and even though you served 5 of those 15. So let's maybe look at it from two perspectives here. The first one, what was it like to get sentenced to 15 years, right? Not knowing that you'll only serve 5. And how did your life in prison change your perspective? Because you said you came out and you wanted to go to ministry, and that was something that you really focused on.
Well, honestly, after I was placed under the $100,000 bond, my lawyers uh, contacted the DAs, and they were going to have a hearing. It was mental, and I've been his lawyer, and all of a sudden this happens.
Yeah.
Something has to be wrong. Okay, the judge, whom I knew well, they all decided that they were going to commit me to Dorothy Dixon Mental Hospital for a 6 week observation. I stayed there 3 weeks. I just got to the point where I called my lawyers. I'm okay. I need to get out. So, but during that 3 weeks there, it's when it all came together. I just said, I knew, I said, look, whatever whatever caused me to get in this situation, I'm finished with it. That's just what I said to myself. Whatever it is, I'm finished with it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when I made a commitment that I wasn't going to gamble anymore. I alcoholism here because when you gamble, you want to have a drink and all this stuff. So I didn't none of that. All of that was gone. When I came back out of the hospital, they reduced my bond to $10,000, and of course I was out. So I stayed out on bond before I was sentenced for about 5 months. And it was all during that time where all of the reflection came. I felt the call. So when I went in into prison, I'd already made my mind up that I was going to go in, get everything behind me. I wasn't going to worry about anything. I was going to do what I needed to do, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what I did. So I had accepted uh, the call to the ministry before I even went in. And
Yeah.
when I talked with my pastor about it, because I was in the Missionary Baptist Church, we do what you call a trial sermon. I'd rather wait until I get back to do the trial sermon because I don't want anybody to feel as if I'm doing all this because I was ready to get it behind me. And I wanted to, it was not a matter of trying to fight it. I want to just look, plead guilty. I'm going to get this behind me. When I come out, my life is totally different. And that's what I did.
Mm-hmm.
I got no infraction while I was confined. As a matter of fact, I was in Ashland, Kentucky. I'm still the prison fellowship minister, even to this day, came to my trial sermon. Uh, Came when I was installed. That trial sermon became when I was installed as pastor of the church in 1991, and wouldn't believe it, came back to my retirement at the end of 2022. And the kind of person that I was, the chaplains allowed me to leave. When I tell people this, they some don't believe it, but it happened. I left the prison system in Ashland, Kentucky, twice.
Mm-hmm.
One of those times I left, they allowed me to leave and fly out by myself and come back by myself. And I had gotten to the point where the chaplains and the wardens wouldn't even uh, uh, didn't want the inmates to know where I was. So most of the times it was like I had gone back to court or something of that sort. But I was at a seminar. I went to a seminar in Washington D.C. I went to a a 3 week seminar in Stallstown, Pennsylvania. That's just the way my prison sentence went. And it was just awesome. I tell people it was just a matter of me getting it behind me. When I came out, that was my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've been that way ever since.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. And again, it sounds like you'd made that commitment before, irrespective of what the outcome was.
Exactly.
Now, I think you had this vision of what things would look like when you come out, but what was it like when you were in there? Because there's something to be said about solitary confinement, and you hear a lot of stories. I've read about Mike Tyson and Malcolm X, and it changed their perspective being in there. And when you're in there, and I think what I've been able to equate it to is when people seek out solitude for themselves to have this deeper connection with their higher power, or however they look at it, because now you don't have the distractions of the material world, and things
Mhm.
become very simple, and you start taking all those things that we normally take for granted, you start appreciating them more. So in those 5 years, what was it like for you, and were you able to make any deeper connection within yourself that was lacking when you started that sentence?
Well, I think I had made the commitment before I went in.
Hmm.
What the sentence probably did was it gave me a chance to uh, dive further into where I wanted to be. You know,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's when I started writing my manuscript,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and it didn't even start out as a book. It really just I was really more or less a diary, just how'd I get here, all this type of stuff. And it was only when I got out that people started looking at it and told me that you need to, I think you need to publish this. But that's so that confinement period was basically just a matter to have me just dive more into a learning process. Uh, I went, like I said, I went to 2 seminars, and so that was really what it was all about for me. Where I assisted the chaplain, so I set up stuff, you know, it for the inmates, the Christian inmates, and the we had people to come in. And so I was a part of all of this, and it just helped me in my actually. I think it helped me probably if I had been out and not there, I probably wouldn't have gotten as deep
Mm-hmm.
and as I, 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 I put it to you like this, and maybe this will help you see where I am. It was I made a commitment just to read the Bible completely all the way through,
Mm.
every chapter. And I
Mm-hmm.
know I wouldn't probably done that. I would have eventually read it, but I would have reading it by maybe when I did a sermon or when I had to do this, I read this particular scripture or whatever, did some research on it or whatever. But I probably wouldn't have just sat down and read the whole Bible all the way through, but without me an opportunity to do it, I didn't have anything else to do. So that was the kind of things that
Yeah.
I got into.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, because ultimately what I appreciate about people's stories also on this podcast is finding the opportunities through your experiences, right? And it's interesting that you made this commitment and then you were given the opportunity right away. And timing works in a funny way, right? But you were
Mhm.
given that opportunity to really lean into this commitment you're making. And now as you look back, you're like, as much as the idea of being in solitary confinement can be daunting and full of fear for people, you're able to look at it as, well, it gave me this opportunity to dive deeper into something I hadn't looked into before. And with that being said, how was your relationship with faith before and how has that transformed now?
Christian. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so I went to church. I knew uh, Christianity. I knew this or that, but I wasn't this. When I started practicing law, I would take my mom to church, but I wasn't all that into church. Okay, you
Yeah.
understand what I'm saying? But it was a small person. When I was small, obviously I had to go to church. But when I was at the mental hospital, it's when that faith kicked in. That's what gave me what I needed. It was like I knew there was something that I could grab hold to. And it was my faith that got me through all
Mm-hmm.
the different challenges that I felt like that I would need. And it was this faith that I just hung on to. And hanging on to it got me to where I needed to be and where I am now. So I but I tell people all the time that my confinement actually I say this is interesting, but I said to them my confinement actually I think added at least 5 years to my life.
Mm-hmm.
But I tell them that I think it took 5 years for my mom's life. You understand what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? So I
Yeah.
think I it added 5 years to my life, but I think it took 5 years from my mom's life because I'm this year I'll be 80 years old. Okay, my mom died at 76, but I feel good, and I look at me and my partner, and my friends I had before. We're still very good friends. As a matter of fact, we talked just
Mm-hmm.
yesterday. And I look at them with the stress that they talk about. I said, "Oh man, I'm glad I, I didn't hang in here with y'all." But
Yeah.
I didn't tell them that. But that's in my mind. That's what I
Yeah.
say. But that's the story.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. And one of the things I think I've struggled with myself too is often when I go to the mosque or people go to the church, there's a lot of judgment at times. And what I've come to understand with age and experiences is people's own insecurities or their own judgment of themselves gets projected outwards. And that can be hard for people on the receiving end because then they feel this sense of fear and shame to lean into their faith, especially if they're struggling with faith itself or some of the
Mhm.
decisions they're making in life. Now, for yourself, knowing where you were and how you were able to course correct your life, how are you offering that place of no judgment and compassion and mercy for other people that might be in similar situations that are younger and trying to figure out where to take their life? As a minister, how are you able to guide them and use your own experience to shape their future or just be supportive from that perspective?
I'm not sure how to quite answer your question, but I will say that this is what I do. I don't try to hide what I've gone through,
Mm-hmm.
even in my ministry and my pastorate. So my congregation members have read my book. They know my whole background,
Mm-hmm.
and we've talked about it. So when I'm sharing with people, I'll say to them, "I understand your situation. If it's somebody who has gotten in trouble, look, I've been there, but look, we can get through this. You follow
Mm-hmm.
me? That's the approach uh, I take.
Mm-hmm.
It can be with almost anything. I share with them that look, it's not over. You can make it. You can do it. And I've got a couple of things that I always look share with them.
Mhm. Mhm.
Confront it and deal with it. So I'll tell them, I say, no, you you got to accept it now. Accept responsibility for what you've done and move on. You can't dwell with it.
Yeah.
That's what I've done. Accept what you've gone through, accept it, and just move on. Because you've been dwelling it. One thing my mom told me when I got out, she said, "Now, son, you can go and you can put your head in the sand, or you can lie down in the ditch, and all folks are gonna do is come by and rub your head further in the sand, or they're gonna kick more dirt on you."
Mhm.
She said, "But if you would just get up, some of these same folk will give you a helping hand."
Mhm.
And I took her at her word, and that's what I did. When I went back to school, I, when I went aside to go to seminary, Southeastern Theological Seminary, when I applied, they didn't accept me.
Mm.
Okay, and at first it hurt. I said, "Gee, of all places, the seminary ought to take me in."
Yeah.
But I realized what it was.
Yeah.
They looked at my record and saw what I'd gone through, but I didn't let that get me. You know, yeah, I applied again the next semester, and the next semester I was accepted. So I could have easily given up, okay, but I didn't give up, and since I didn't give up, I was able to get accepted, and I got into seminary. And after that time, it was a matter of just smooth sailing. I I never tried to not be open, so I put everything down. Uh, I was trying to get a little part time job while I was in seminary because I think I had just had been got married. I got out in '86, and then I got married in '90. So I was out about four years to my present wife now. And I was trying to get a little part-time job because I wanted to stay in school. And I never forget, I wanted a job at the hotel, and I filled out the application. They don't do that now, I don't think, but at that time, if
Mhm.
you had been convicted, so I had to put down in there, and they said, "We'll get back with you," and I never hear anything from 'em.
Mhm.
I knew it went straight in the trash can. But it did not bother me because I knew that the way to move, you just gotta take it step by step and go head on. And things will eventually work out for you if you take that kind of attitude. That's what I
Mhm.
did.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that because through your own experience, then you're passing that on to others. And I think you've answered my question around how you're showing up for others, and it's you're not giving up on them, just like you didn't give up on yourself.
Exactly.
And I think a lot of times when people are struggling with some of the decisions they've made, they tend to feel like they're alone and no one's going to understand them. But having someone like yourself who's got their back, who sees them and understands them, can go a long way because I think your mom was that person for you
Mhm.
when you came out, and she gave you that message of really holding your head up high and figuring it out and not giving
Yep,
up on yourself.
she did.
Yeah. James, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us and being so vulnerable. I know this is something you do, but I always appreciate people's vulnerability. It does make a huge difference. But yeah, for listeners that want to find your work, your books, or if they ever want to get in touch with you, what are some ways they can do that?
I have a podcast that's Deal by Me podcast. Um, I've already done, I think, over 150. of them.
Mhm.
So I'm constantly
Yeah.
before this right here. So I have that. I have three books that I published. One is Deal by Me, A Golden Opportunity to Blow. And the other one is Deal by Me, Second Edition, a self
Yeah.
evaluation. Have served as moderators for the General Baptist State Convention.
Hmm.
So they asked me to work with churches that may have conflict.
Hmm.
So I did a book on that, which is entitled "Come Let Us Reason Together." So
Hmm.
those are the three books that I have, and so people can get them either from my website, which is www.dealbyme.com. So just always remember that Deal by Me. That's what it is. Uh, and of course, it's a Deal by Me podcast, and this is www.dealbyme.com is a website. So they can get it from website, and they can get all my books from Amazon.com. Those are ways in which they can reach me. And of course, I do lots of seminars, and I do them virtual.
Hmm.
I'm just I try to be available.
Yeah,
I'm busy, but I still try to be available. So
for
that's
sure.
basically where I am.
No, that's great. I will put all of that in the show note captions. But James, thank you again. This was a pleasure. Um, Always
Thank you.
an honor to have these conversations.
Thank you. I appreciate you. And you have a good day.
You as well.
All right. Thank you.